Good afternoon. Welcome to the Enterprise Committee meeting. This is our regular meeting of July 18th, 2019. My name is Lene Palmisano and I chair this committee. With me here on the dais is Vice Chair Alondra Cano, Council members Kevin Reich, Steve Fletcher, and Lisa Goodman. And we've also been joined today for, I believe, item number 1, the update on the promise zone by Council members Ellison and Cunningham. You're welcome to move down and be friendly. We do have a quorum of this committee and more, and we can begin. We have 4 items on the posted agenda today. I am going to, by privilege of the chair, delay or remove the department head and deputy job classification study. It's not ready yet, so we'll look forward to hearing about that at a future enterprise committee. I would like to then add a staff direction that Councilmember Cano has been working on, and I'll place that in for number 4. I believe copies are available through the clerk, and you all have this, people on the dais have this before you. It is in regards to arts and the creative economy and an internal work group that we've been discussing. So we have, our first is an update on the promise zone. This comes from time that we didn't have in the results meetings, and we just knew that we wanted to delve further into this. Many of us haven't heard about it for a few years. The council members whose ward it is in works on this on a regular basis with the people here ready to give us an update today. So let's bring this conversation forward. Welcome, Julie.
Good afternoon.
And I might add, Julie Learson and Jody Molinar Hansen are the people that are staffed with this body of work. Is that correct?
Yes, from the city. Good afternoon, Chair Palmisano, council members. Julianne Learson with the City Coordinator's Office, Director for the North Minneapolis Promise Zone. And unfortunately, Jody is very ill today. So sadly, she is watching from home, but she did a lot of work to support putting this together. So here, I have to make this bigger.
For my colleagues, as she's getting ready, we estimate that this will be about a 15-minute conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I've just given you a quick summary of what I'm going to talk about, which is the designation, which comes out of Housing and Urban Development at the Fed, and what our obligations and expectations are from the federal government. The preference points are AmeriCorps Vistas, who are here with me today. The highlights of some of my work specifically, and then where we're proposing to go with the work of the Promise Zone. So the Promise Zone was designated we officially received the designation in 2015. And we did actually applied twice in 2013 and 2014, and were not successful the first time. Promise zones across the country, there are 22, and the reason for the designation was looking at communities where there are significant disparities, oftentimes by race. In our case, it is by race. However, there is also a promise zone in Appalachia, but there's very stark differences in class in those areas, and it touches rural, tribal, urban, red and blue states. So it really was an effort to try to work on making things more equitable in communities. And you can see some of the data that we put together. This is 2013 through 2017 data. So we have the MPZ census tracts versus the city of Minneapolis as a whole. See, we have some work to do in the city as a whole, but specifically in the Promise Zone, the cost burden households, for example, and the cost burden for renters is meaning that the severely cost burden is 50% or more of income going towards housing. Boundaries are on the north. We have 44th, The west is Queen Avenue, the east is the river and the freeway, and the south is Bassett Creek Valley. So we can see we bit off a lot as a city, our goals. The kind of underpinning of the work is the advancing racial equity work. The other big goals are increasing economic development, strengthening health and community, promoting stable housing, creating jobs, and expanding educational opportunities. Some of the key benefits for Minneapolis and North Minneapolis specifically are the opportunity for the city to build relationships with partners in the community. So it could be community-based agencies. Also could be departments within the city that are working towards closing the gaps in these areas. Partnering with HUD, which we have also not able to join us today, is on vacation, Jake Ackervick. We have a federal liaison, as each Promise Zone does, who helps out quite a bit with navigating the federal agencies, which can be a little bit of a challenge. Some of the other government agencies that we partner with are the Small Business Administration, the Federal Reserve, and Economic Development Administration. One of the key benefits is having AmeriCorps Vistas. So we've talked a little bit more about that, but we have volunteers in service to America. They are, consider them the domestic Peace Corps. Most of them are, actually everyone who served with me is a college graduate. And a lot of them are interested in working in the public sector or in nonprofit. So it gives them a great opportunity to do capacity building in a real world setting. And then, of course, the grant preference, which I think we have talked about at the council somewhat, where community organizations or the city itself or other government agencies can get a slight bump in their federal grant applications in certain agencies. So some sort of key points of interest. The designation ends in 2025. So it's a 10-year designation, and we have less than 6 years. So ours runs in April of 2025. Some of the requirements on us is to do annual reporting and quarterly reporting on, they ask us to report on the number of investments, federal investments that were made in the Promise Zone, as well as they actually ask about non-federal investments. So they're looking for us to tell them about what philanthropy is doing as well, or what the city or the state might be doing. And then I have annual and quarterly reporting on the AmeriCorps program, and also a renewal application process each year for my vistas. The Promise Zones were reauthorized in 2019 budget bill, so we did have an administration change, and we're a little concerned that there wouldn't be a continuation, but there has been support from the new federal administration. And then the opportunity zones, some of you are aware of the opportunity zone work. We have 7, that's a tax credit for people to invest their capital gains and into different types of real estate development and get a tax break for 10 years. And that was actually part of the original conception of Promise Zone that didn't come through it initially, but it did come in the last budget bill. And there potentially the time frame to do those or maximize those investments will be by the end of this year. Our Promise Zone has 7 census tracts, but there are several other, I know several of you also have census tracts that are in opportunity zones. So some of the highlight of my work, the AmeriCorps Vistas. We've had anywhere from 9 to 4. 9 was something I had no idea about until my first week at the city, and I said, wow, that's a lot. So it's a little bit more manageable with fewer. We have recruited 5 new people to come in shortly at the beginning of August. They focus on various areas, economic development, We have a data analyst, resource development or a grant specialist, a Vista leader. And actually this year we're going to be helping support the new Office of Violence Prevention. So we'll have someone working specifically with Sasha Cotton and Jen White on the violence prevention work. We have 1 year left on our CNCS, our AmeriCorps grant, and then after that they want us to do a cost sharing. I'm going to sip my water. I've had a cold, so. So I touched a little bit on the federal grants preference already. How it works is that we certify the grants for application to HUD. We also have a process at the city for certifying them where we ask a fair amount of information about what the goals are. And we ask that the organizations will invest at least 25% in North Minneapolis. Most of them do 75 to 100%, however. And federal agencies are beginning to shift towards having opportunity zone preference on grants, although this is layered. So they are not getting rid of the promise zone, but they may have both. And then the opportunity zone preference will open it up for other communities. So how we help with grants is we do a lot of research on what the funding is. We try to get our partners to apply. We track them, how much money they got, whether they got the grant or not, and how much. And this photo is an example of us helping the Hawthorne Neighborhood Council secure a grant. We don't know if they have secured it yet, but they will. They're trying to do a lot of work on the opioid crisis in North Minneapolis. And so they're going after a couple federal grants.
Ms. Learson, these are good examples of potential applicants for federal grants. You've mentioned that most of the federal grants received have gone 75 to 100% within the promise zone instead of the required 25%. Can you give me a couple tangible examples of those federal grants? Like, how much were they for, and what did they help to produce in the promise zone? Or is that, if that's coming next?
That's great timing. Fine. That's my next slide. So this is a short list. I think we've actually realized, I think we've certified 40 grants applications. But so like the Appetite for Change one, for example, is 100% going onto the north side. I'll highlight the ones that we have the photos here. The new skate park at Juxtaposition Arts, that is some of you know it's a temporary installation while they do a capital campaign to expand their facility. So that's all, and it's great. If you haven't been there, you should stop by and see it. There's a picture of Lisa Smestead here. So the lead grants, those are, well, I'll go on the next slide. I have actually a highlight on the Hennepin County part of that, but a lot of lead reduction work on the north side because those are zip codes that have really high disproportionate levels of lead poisoning still. And well, I'm not going to say that the Minneapolis Police Department is going just to the north side, but that's a good example of where we realized the body camera grant was coming out in like the application was due in 2 weeks, and we did a quick write-up and shipped it over to Assistant Chief Jose, and then they took it and ran with it and actually secured the funding.
Ms. Learson, on your last slide, you mentioned that 10 peace officers were hired as a result of one of these grants. Does that mean that the funding for 10 of our police officers to work on GVI goes away at the end of this finite amount of money, or?
If I'm not mistaken, that was a 3-year grant, and it also required a match, which the council did approve when the funding came in. So yes, likely there will be a need to replace that funding. I believe that started last year, the GVI. We've gotten 2 COPS grants, actually. But the focus on GVI, I believe that funding actually started rolling in 2018. So we would have through 2021. I can double check the dates for you. But yes, that funding would have to be replaced if we want to continue with that. So this is the Hennepin County. This is just a little highlight of, talks a little bit more about the lead grants, and that they've gone into 366 homes, 45% on the north side, and 35% were African American. We've had some questions about the status of the federal grant making. What we do know is that there's been a bit of a decrease just in RFPs coming out, and that there was a pretty significant lag with the change in administration where there was nothing coming out. But that has picked back up. The applications are very complicated and time consuming. I don't know if anybody has ever done a federal grant application, but it's not something you decide to do today and get it done by tomorrow. The awards are very, very competitive. They may have, $10 million and 20 awards and multiple groups from every state applying. And what we find when community-based organizations, that they just often don't have the capacity to write them. So that's one of the areas where we're able to help. Not just to write them, but to check all the boxes, that they have a DUNS number, that they have an affirmative action statement, and they're very complicated. The other thing is, go ahead.
Ms. Susan, with a federal grant, when it is received by a small organization, a community partner, like say a neighborhood organization, does that federal money get administered through the city? Are we always a fiscal agent?
Almost never.
Always,
almost never.
Direct relationship. Almost never.
We are almost never a fiscal agent.
Okay.
Occasionally, we will see a fiscal agency with another organization, but it's rare that you see these applications coming through the city. Or you'll have a partnership of 2 or 3 organizations, and one will be the primary. Usually it's the one that has a greater financial capacity and accounting ability and programmatic history will take the lead, and then they subcontract with the other organizations. So I think you've all seen this chart before. This represents the full line represents all of the federal grants awarded, and then the blue part is where they're for preference points. And we track it this way because the feds ask us to. So you can see we haven't had any awards yet in 2019, but that's not unusual for this time of year. We have 6 applications in, and we're anticipating perhaps another one coming in on opioids shortly from Hawthorne Neighborhood Council. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my responsibilities and some of the work that the administrative activities. Some of you may have been to our annual recognition for our Promise Zone, for our vistas, so they help, but I also coordinate that with the mayor's office and the Corporation for National Service. We've got a little word cloud here that represents the community input that we've gathered from numerous community engagement activities. So you can see on the right-hand side there that talks about the different activities where we're out in community asking. I mean, sometimes we do something very fun like name a Northside ice cream flavor, but usually it's a little more substantive than that. Like in this case, what would you like to see more of in North Minneapolis? And again, we've certified, I basically facilitate the process of getting those grants certified. The city coordinator actually signs off on them. but those requests come to me first, and then I coordinate with the organization to make sure it gets done. Next highlight is I think one of the biggest values that we get out of the Promise Zone is a convening power and also a influence, also the ability to help residents navigate the city better. So with AC Joseph's permission, I was told I could take a little bit of credit for the pursuit policy being changed because I helped facilitate, along with City Attorney Siegel, who's just joined us, conversations around the impact of those pursuits in community. And we have seen that North Minneapolis has been disproportionately impacted, like so many other things, because of police pursuits. The next slide, you see, many of you probably heard about Jaquan and his hot dog stand. What is not known is that we had a key role in pulling all of the players together to resolve this issue so that he could be legitimate in doing his business, including bringing the folks at Neon and Environmental Health together, volunteering the 4th Precinct and the Urban League to actually let him set up and pay for it. They paid for his permits. And then, of course, supporting the business. The next one is just a quick, some of you know Houston White, who's working on his own development and his site. And I was able to help facilitate him meeting with CPED about getting loans and funding and what that project could look like. And that's also part of a broader conversation about 44th Avenue, getting some sort of increased commercial activity in Ward 4. Finally, this is all of the things I do in the evening, this work. I've been part of, just a couple highlights, even within the coordinator's office, the recast advisory committee, green zones. I've been part of both north and south side green zones, various crime and safety meetings, Upper Harbor Terminal. So really trying to get out there and try and understand what the community wants to see happen in community, and then being a voice for those individuals who might have time or will to come and speak for themselves down here. I think I'm almost done here. So what we've done is we're trying to align. We are aligned very well with the Promise Zone original goals are aligned with where the city is going. And we're currently working with leaders in our office to make sure that we're synthesizing those things, and would like to maybe update some of the sub-goals. We're not allowed to change the goals, but we can update some of the sub-goals, which if anyone wants to read that, I can provide it for you later. It's a pretty long document. And then we want to use the remaining time, the remaining 5.5 years, to accomplish some specific things that we may have influence over but won't completely define. We'll listen to other people. And then this was a very fun Jody creation. She's very proud of this. So on the left, you just see the areas that we applied, and then there's a line where we have alignment in the current strategic planning process that the city has been undergoing. And I think that's all. I do want to say thanks to all of my wonderful people who are here, especially my Vistas, who put a lot of work in. And I'll take any more questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Vistas, for being here. I'm curious, some of my colleagues have questions or comments. We'll start with Councilmember Goodman and then Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you so much for your work. I really appreciate getting the update. I'm wondering if you could tell me if you are a business or development in the zone itself, just by virtue of being in the zone, do you qualify for any assistance? There's a building that's being renovated on Glenwood right now, and I had heard, and it's fully leased, and I had heard that people want to be in the building because it's in the promise zone. And I'm not sure why people want to be in the building because it's in the promise zone. I think they want to be in it because it's cool on the north side and on Glenwood, and Glenwood's really evolving and it's very diverse, but they claim they want to be in it because it's in the promise zone. Okay. So is there some advantage to businesses just being in the zone themselves?
Okay. Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, thank you for the question. There are some funding opportunities. They tend to be targeted more at nonprofits. However, like the Small Business Administration does have funding that could be utilized by a small business that's attached to a nonprofit or not. Or there's things like the Capital Magnet Fund from Treasury. Economic Development Administration also has funding. Of course, I like to think they want to be on the north side because it's so awesome, but there are ways of doing that, particularly if it's a public-private partnership or a partnership with philanthropy or, yeah, I think that covers it.
Madam Chair, well, clearly people are going there because they think it's awesome to be there, because they're not getting anything for doing it. So it makes your point. It also says something about the fact that you could put up renovate a building and immediately fill it up, and it's on the near north side. I think that's great. I thought maybe I had heard people were going there because maybe they would, I don't want to say get something, but could apply for or get some preference in something they're doing. And I suppose through EDA that makes some sense. I think most of these organizations are for profit. So it's great. Thanks.
Councilmember Ellison and then Cunningham.
Just had a real quick question and then more of a statement. But I think on slide 15, I believe it was. Hopefully I'm remembering that correctly. It was a list of the number of applications per year, I believe. That slide, and I noticed that since 2015, there have been applications have been in the double digits. And then it looked like most recently we're at 6 this year. Mm-hmm. Is that because of the change in administration that there are less grants to apply for? Just asking, why maybe we're seeing a reduction this year in applications.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Ellison, I would say that it has more to do with the timing. Grant season is for the feds is pretty dead between October 1st and probably beginning of March. So we usually have a crush of applications between March and I would say July, maybe into August. So we're expecting quite a few more. And I mean, one of the things we do try to do is get, when we see something that might be a good fit for an organization, is to actually go and talk to them and set up time and give them the technical assistance. I know we did that with the Neighborhood Hub as well, to encourage them to apply and let them know that they have some support. So we have a little bit of a strategy around that as well. Awesome, thank you for that. So we could see, by the end of the year, that the number of applications still be in the double digits, kind of repeating what we've seen in past years. Great. One thing I also just wanted to say for my colleagues, is that one of the things I really love about Director Learson and her team is that they are pretty proactive, right? They're not waiting by the phone, waiting for folks to come and say, hey, we're looking at a federal grant. Sometimes whether it's Northside businesses or nonprofits, folks are busy, they're stretched to the max, and they don't necessarily know what opportunities are out there. And so it's been really great to see this team become a touch point. And then to some of the highlights that you also made were some of the connections that were not federal grant related that your office has made, which I can personally attest to.
folks don't necessarily see, oh, that's the city, oh, this is the Promise Zone, they only do federal grants, that kind of thing. Folks need support, they need help, and instead of telling people, oh, that's not our purview, I've seen your team time and again sort of jump into a situation to help somebody, even if their need is not a federal grant. So just wanted to highlight that and name that for my colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ellison, Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Learson, for this, and thank you to all the Vistas who have done amazing work, both this year and in years past. I'm fortunate that I have actually been around since the beginning of the Promise Zone and was fairly close to it because that was largely led by the previous mayoral administration, and so I was able to really see this rolled out from the beginning, and so and now I'm grateful to be in this leadership position, to be able to be a champion of this work. One of the things I think is really important to name when it comes to the Promise Zone is that it's not about taking resources from other parts of the city. It's about taking the resources that are being brought into the community and for them to be more intentionally invested. We can have a deluge of resources poured into the community at one time, but without infrastructure, then we can't have intentionality around those investments going where they're needed most, aligning it, making sure that you have various stakeholders all at the table having a shared language and a common conversation. And some of the work, so I'm grateful to be able to be a champion of this work and really be involved with this alignment and refresh. I like to think about the Promise Zone really from the sunset date in 2025 and work backwards from that. What do we want to see in our community by 2025, and then what are the things that we need to do in order to achieve that within the goal areas that have been identified. It's also necessary for us to be thinking about a refresh of this work. Again, we can't really change the goals, but the sub-goals are flexible through the lens of the 2040 plan, of the street goals, the values and the goals that we have set, and just the general vision of this council and mayoral administration. The end goal is for this work to actually quite honestly be institutionalized. So for it to be leader-proof. It doesn't matter who is in a position of leadership, that this work is being carried forward. And so right now, I'm really excited to be working on the building out, fleshing out the systemic infrastructure. And I just want to name that one of the most powerful, important components of the Promise Zone that is of value is the social capital that is within that work. Director Learson has incredible connections throughout the community, has a lot of trust in community members, as well as many city staff members across departments. Folks know the Promise Zone, they trust the Promise Zone, they proactively this work, as Councilmember Allison said, they will reach out proactively to say, hey, this is something that you could be working on, as well as community reaching out for help that's totally outside of the purview of the Promise Zone because there's so much social capital there. So, so that is a tremendous asset that we as a city have, and want to say thank you for all of your work that you've done in cultivating that social capital and that trust with the community.
Thank you.
There we go. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yep. I do want to move to receive and file this as an update for the Promise Zone formally as a council. So all those on the committee, this is a motion to receive and file this update. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Next up, we have a social media policy presentation by way of our communications director, Greta Bergstrom, and it'll just take her a moment. We do anticipate this being another 15-minute presentation. We're going to try to keep it to 15 minutes, and I do imagine there'll be a lot of discussion, and we'll just see. We might pause you midway through, Director, and ask those questions as they come up.
Sure.
Thanks. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, council members. My name is Greta Bergstrom. I am the city's Director of Communications, and I'm pleased to be here this afternoon in front of you to present the draft social media policy, the new updated policy for your review for the city. I do want to start quickly by acknowledging and thanking a number of departments who have helped to develop this policy in coordination with the Communications Department. First and foremost, the City Attorney's Office, who has worked hand in hand with us as partners. I'd really love to give a shout out to them in particular because they have worked very hard on this as well as the HR department, the city clerk's office, the coordinator's office, and IT, who have all been partners. And we've had really a lot of feedback from other departments as well as policymakers in developing this policy. I would also like and would be remiss if I did not thank Councilmember Warsame for authoring the policy and agreeing to help shepherd this kind of new era forward for us here at the city. Brief background, the city approved a resolution back in 2006 which authorized elected officials to create and maintain city-supported blogs. In 2011, the city approved its first and only social media policy, which does apply to all city employees, but it did not apply to elected officials nor to members of boards and commissions. The current policy is obviously almost a decade out of date, and we are looking to provide a lot more guidance and clarity since there's a lot of gray area contained currently in the 2011 policy. Not surprising, everybody's aware that the social media landscape and of course the legal landscape has changed and grown dramatically since the existing policy was adopted. Social media platforms obviously are powerful communications vehicles for public information, for engagement and discussion. Social media is an important way for the city of Minneapolis and our departments and policymakers to connect and listen to and engage with the public online. I do want to stress that we want to encourage active, transparent participation in social media and online, but we need to make sure that we're being intentional and careful about what and when and kind of where we post that information. The courts, especially very recently, have focused on how accounts are used, not necessarily what somebody says what they are. So you might say it's a personal account, but really it's determined as to how you use that account and the type of content you post. And so the Communications Department and the City Attorney's Office have developed a new social media policy and set of procedures. For the purpose of this policy, the term covered persons are anyone who does work on behalf of the city. So it's quite broad-based. For the first time, elected officials as well as board and commission members will be covered under this policy. The new policy would therefore supersede the 2006 blog policy as well as the 2011 social media policy. The City Council would approve the policy itself. Communications is responsible for a set of implementing procedures to make sure that that policy is followed. I'm going to first speak to the elected officials portion of the policy. So the City Communications Department would help and work with our elected officials in establishing official city ward accounts as well as accounts for the mayor's office as well. We want to make sure that we have clear separation of city, ward, the government accounts from personal accounts and from any campaign accounts, so that there's clear, bright lines of separation. We also want to make sure that we have and provide the best user experience for our residents and for our public audiences. We want to make sure that the next office holder who should inherit the city or ward account is able to keep that following, given that that is a core asset. You know, your volume of followers gives you the platform to speak from. The public would still receive city ward information regardless of who is in office. The account would remain official and a city asset. The records would be archived, so our office would work with policymaker offices to make sure that the data put out through the city ward accounts would be archived, and the next office holder would be able to start fresh with no content as they inherit the following and the asset. Throughout all of this, ensuring retention of public data and making sure that conduct follows the policy. And official city ward accounts would then allow support from the city communications department from staff back to our policymaker offices. Really quickly, we have a little model. This is the direction that we're looking at to take the city's social media communications for elected officials. You can see there's a personal account, space for a campaign electoral account, and then the city ward account. Quickly, some examples as you would, really as the public would see your Twitter account or your Facebook account. These are public-facing profiles, including whatever photo you would choose to use in your accounts. The Twitter account handle, as you can see, and the Facebook username, so Twitter being on the left and Facebook profile on the right, we would just want to make sure that the goal is consistency across the platforms. And again, that's to help with our residents and with constituent user experience. We are recommending that there be a designated social media officer that council would approve. The procedures speak to this and establish a social media officer. I want to make sure to clarify that this is not a new FTE. This is not a new position. This would be a designation to oversee the procedures and basically help to make sure that the policy is implemented appropriately. It would be very similar to the ethics officer that's already in place through the city attorney's office, or the chief cable officer in place through city communications. In terms of the city use of social media, this would be kind of department use of social media accounts. All new and existing city social media accounts would be approved through the communications department. We wouldn't want departments opening up new accounts kind of without intention, foresight, and some sort of strategic reason. New accounts would have and should have a social media action plan, or SMAP, and have a strategic purpose that would be separate and apart, some sort of reason for existing that where content couldn't already be pushed out through the city's master social media accounts. Procedures would provide process for creating as well as deactivating accounts as needed. So really a lot of work with our office to make sure they're being done appropriately and that all content would continue to be archived. Blocking or deleting content would not be allowed except in those very rare circumstances, in which case if there were a circumstance that merited that, you would be working with our office, the city attorney's office, to make sure that we're making some decisions around that, because the content would be archived if a decision were made that for some reason blocking was warranted. We would have a backup as to why, and that would be done intentionally. In terms of the impact on employees managing city-supported social media, the administrators would be approved by the social media officer so that we know who is driving that particular account, so that we have a record of that and know how to get in contact with them and just can work in collaboration with them in that department. City accounts would be used for city business only, so we want to make sure that that's the reason for the account and the reason for the data going out to the public. The social media officer would retain all administrative access to those accounts to make sure records are archived and that conduct by administrators is appropriate and follows the policy. Personal use of social media, we've had a lot of questions around that. To be clear, the procedures and the policy are not to stifle First Amendment rights to free speech. We recognize that our city staff, policymakers, everybody have the right to their opinion and to free speech online, but we do set guidelines and expectations for personal conduct as a private individual. Some of this has been actually somewhat missing since the 2011 policy, so I think this will be very helpful to city staff. Personal social media must not be used to conduct city business or for official city communications. So we want to, again, that clear line between personal and government use. Conduct on personal social media can still reflect on the city and could result in discipline, again, if not following the guidelines, making sure to be careful as you're posting content. The public also, there are some guidelines with public interactions on social media back with the city. The procedures set expectations for how we expect the public to interact while on city-supported social media sites. Establishes the city's social media as a limited public forum where you can only discuss uses, based on city information and terms of use. For instance, staying on topic based on whatever was posted. You could not promote illegal activity or campaigning or advertising, that type of thing. So we want to make sure that kind of keeping clear lines there. The terms notify the public that all interactions with the government accounts are archived, so their opinions and the information they're sharing back with that government account are archived as well, so that we have a record of that conversation. Brings clarity to what content is unacceptable. For instance, threats, illegal activity, pornography, things like that, are things you cannot do, and so that would be an example of where you might work with our office, or the department would work with our office on anything such as that. Violating the terms could result in the removal of content or blocking or banning of that individual, that public person. And it provides guidance for how staff should handle violations. Again, asking staff to reach out to the city communications department, and we would work with the city attorney's office not to take that and kind of do it on your own in the moment, but let's have an intentional conversation about that. So going forward, we are asking the council for approval of this new policy. The effective date would be January 1st of 2020. We're asking for that because we recognize there will be training and work needed between now or when a policy would be approved and when we would want city accounts fully in compliance. So there would be a certain amount of preparation leading up to January 1st, internal communications with departments, development of a training strategy, things like appointed leader onboarding, new employee orientation, plain language write-ups for our policymakers, for boards and commissions, for staff, so that they could clearly see what is expected, and we aim to make sure that that is easily understood by them. By January and February of 2020, social media action plans for the existing city-supported social media sites would be into our office. We're asking within 60 days of effective date of policy. And then the procedures, we plan to review and update those at least annually, taking into account the legal environment, social media platforms, and that type of thing. So with that, I will stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your work along with the ethics officer Susan Trammell's work in helping to develop this policy and put some language around it, along with Laura Davis, who has been helpful. I'm sorry, I can't see who you're pointing to.
Madam Chair?
Oh,
Carol Bashoon.
Carol
did most of the
Bashoon.
work on this. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
I'm
welcome.
sorry, Carol Bashoon, who's done a lot of.
Carol Bashoon and Susan Trammell, I should say, have been hand in hand with us the whole way. We appreciate that, too.
Super. So does the posted author of the ordinance, Councilmember Warsame, want to say a few words?
Thank you to city staff, especially Greta, for the work she's done. Susan and Carol, thank you very much. And I think this just it's common sense. Social media has had huge strides. Every year there's a new app, there's a new way of doing things. Even this morning, people are just worried about that face app that makes you look older. I don't know why people want to age so fast, but that it's collecting data. And there's worries that this is a trap, and so social media, we need to get a handle of it, and I think this is a very good policy and procedure and going forward, and love to have the support of my colleagues on this. So, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. So first, I'll just say I support this. I don't totally love it, but I support it, and I think I've been sort of thinking about my own social media practice, and I do think that there are platforms where it makes a lot of sense to separate. Facebook sort of set up as a platform to have different pages, and that's going to be very authentic. Twitter, people really gravitate towards personal accounts. It's not something where people usually follow business accounts or like interacting that way, and so I think it's going to make city government feel a little more impersonal over that kind of media, and I think there are probably things that I'm really clear are not city business, things that I'm really clear are city business, and then some things that I post that are in a gray area that I may just not post. I may be less active on social media because of this, and I don't think the 1,900 Russian bots that follow me are missing much if I don't, post a few funny jokes or whatever, but or not funny jokes. There is an inauthenticity that I think we risk as we move into this, and so it'll be important for all of us, I think, to think about how to make this engaging, about how to make these new city accounts engaging, because I think it's not something that's automatic, that people will follow it, that people will want to follow it, or that we'll be able to do anything useful enough with them to really justify it. So depending on the platform, it's going to be easier on some than on others, and
Sure.
We'll sort of figure it out, but I think it makes sense to have some rules. One question that Chair Palmisano and I were discussing that I think it would be worth getting into is there have been some stories around the country of, for example, ICE agents participating in a Facebook page where some wildly inappropriate racist and xenophobic jokes and memes were shared, and they were participating in that kind of a role. And I guess I'm curious in terms of our staff direction and in terms of what constraints this puts on someone in the way they use in a personal account. I know we're protecting people's First Amendment rights, but what are the expectations? Would we potentially see people's personal accounts if they're using them in a way that really does something inappropriate that would call into question whether we're comfortable with them in the public role that they're in? Are we still looking at those things? I think people are going to want to understand how a situation like that interacts with this policy.
Yeah, no, those are really good questions. Let me first say that there will continue to be a certain amount of gray area that we will all have to manage through, which will be a reason for updating of the procedures annually. And then again, just working collaboratively across departments with our policymakers to figure out what makes sense in the moment. That question has come up a lot. I will say that we don't have the capacity, obviously, in our department, nor would we be managing, monitoring actively, or certainly archiving personal accounts. It will be complaint-based, and so I expect, with the new policy, and again, the onus put on our department to help train and educate people on the new policy, if something happens, such as, some conduct on a personal account really goes against the values, the mission, the work of the city, I would expect that would come forward, and we would work with the city attorney's office, we would work with whatever department that person was within, with our HR partners to determine what should happen next. So I think it really would be on a case-by-case basis. There have been instances, obviously, police departments, as you mentioned, with ICE agents, where what they are saying in their personal space really conflicts with their professional government role. And so that would be something that would have to be brought to our attention versus us, unless we saw it or something. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Other questions? Director Bergstrom, does this change the rules for employees of our city in terms of how they interact on social media?
I think I mean, I think generally speaking, most people aren't going to experience or see much of a difference. But again, we're asking you to be intentional about what you are posting in your personal space, and or to put a disclaimer on if, for instance, you want to speak about a city-based issue. But I think generally speaking, I don't think most people are going to notice a big change at all if they are conducting themselves online in a non-threatening way or something that goes, radically against the values of the city. I don't think they will see a change, and nothing would be brought to our attention as well.
So in summary, this is a big change for how we do social media as council offices, not so much for employees.
I would say that's pretty accurate, yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Next, we have a receive and file update on city workforce, the self-insured medical plan, and our employees benefits program. Do we have Director Ferguson presenting?
And Director
And Rika
Stenerson.
Stenerson. Super.
Good afternoon.
Thank you and welcome. Again, we have up to 20 minutes for this, and then we'll be done including questions in that. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Palmisano and members of the Enterprise Committee. I'm Patience Ferguson, Chief HR Officer for the City of Minneapolis, and I also have with me today Rika Stenerson, who is the Director of Total Compensation. Very briefly, we will provide you with a snapshot of our changing demographics and also highlight current and future benefit approaches designed to meet the changing needs of our workforce. In addition, we will also provide an update on our self-insured medical plan. But before I begin my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge and thank some of the people that are in the room joining us today. We have leaders from our employee resource groups, MBEN, Women America, which is our military group. And also, we have our labor partners that are in the room. And we'd also like to thank John LWhpact, who is the actuary consultant that we work with from Deloitte. So now I will begin the presentation. The City of Minneapolis is really competing with our public sector and private sector counterparts to fill jobs, and it's not getting any easier. It's all hand on deck to ensure that we have a competitive compensation and benefits package. Before Ms. Stenerson provides you with an update, I'd like to just take a moment to provide you with a little bit of context regarding the city's workforce. And in this part of the presentation, it will include the numbers of employees, including gender and race demographics, separations and retirements, generations in the workforce, and then an overview of how our workforce has changed over the course of several years. So first of all, I'll talk a little bit about our workforce. As an employer, the City of Minneapolis is ranked number 39 on the list of the 50th largest employers in the state of Minnesota. We are now at this point 30% female, 70% male, 30% people of color, and 70% white. The bars in the chart that you see in front of you represent the number of employees leaving the city each year since 2016. The purple bars represent the number of employees that have left due to retirement, and at the pace that we're going right now, we will see double the numbers of employees that are retiring from the City of Minneapolis. This is a very interesting chart that was very shocking to me when I first looked at it, because as you can see, for the first time in the City of Minneapolis's history, we have 5 generations in the workforce. With the different generations also come differing needs and different expectations. For example, some of our younger employees now are forced to become grandparents. Some of our employees are now concerned with taking care of their parents. Many of employees have expressed interest in flexible work schedules. And people are also coming to the city with different expectations regarding life balance, engagement, two-way communication, and more robust technology. Now, this is regarding our changing workforce. This slide that you have in front of you shows the generations entering and leaving the workforce, the city workforce that is, since 2017. The orange bar reflects employees leaving the city by generation, and the blue bars represent those who have been hired in the city. The key learning on this slide is that millennials make up the majority of the new hires to the city of Minneapolis since 2017. So when I saw that slide, it really shows that our workforce is changing rapidly, and the question for each and every one of us is, what are the implications with regard to our benefits? What are the things we need to be thinking about, not only for our current workforce, but also for our future workforce? So with that in mind, I am now going to turn this over to Ms. Steenerson, who will give us an overview and update of our self-insurance plan, as well as some opportunities, benchmarks with regard to our benefits packages in the future.
Good afternoon, Chair Palmisano and members of the committee. I'm Rika Steenerson, Director of Total Compensation here at the city. Thank you for having us today. I want to start with just giving a brief update on the status of our self-funded medical plan. It seems like just yesterday we were in here getting council action on self-funding the plan, and that was back in 2017. One thing that we do know today is that our medical plan benefits are still the #1 benefit of importance to our workforce, no matter what generation. It's still, health plan is very important. And we've been fortunate to have great partners with our benefits labor management group and labor working with us on that plan and making the changes that we need over the years to keep that plan competitive and affordable and accessible, and ensuring that we're providing the benefits that people need. The benefits labor management guiding principles have been the same for a number of years about improving the health of employees, controlling healthcare costs, and increasing employee engagement. As you all know, the city's benefits are collectively bargained, and we're fortunate to have these partners working with us to ensure that our plan is viable. The Benefits Labor Management Committee helped us to implement changes over the years, and it's part of the reason that we also enjoy very high levels of engagement in our health. The wellness program that we have attached to our benefit program had 82% of employees meeting the incentive to get the lower premium for last year, and we're on track to get at least that number of employees participating again this year to receive the reduced premium in 2020. You'll be able to see the results of some of that engagement on the next slide when we look at the history of the self-funded plan. So back in 2016 and 2017, which is represented by the blue bars on the left, this is when the city was still in a fully insured plan arrangement. At that time, we had rate caps in place with our carrier so that we couldn't receive an increase over 5%. So the rate caps kept those increases those 2 years at 5%. Then in 2018, which was the year we decided to go to self-insured, we received a renewal of 7.5%. For the purposes of this slide, in the blue bars, we're projecting that beyond 2018, the city would have continued to have at least a 5% renewal if we had stayed fully insured. The orange bar represents where we then set our own premium levels based on what we projected would be our claims and other expenses. So you can see that over the past 3 years, and including the 2020 estimated premium increase, we've saved a substantial amount of money over what we would have been paying had we stayed fully insured. This slide again shows that the blue bar is where we would have been had we stayed fully insured with 5% increase, which is very conservative as an estimate. In the past, prior to self-insuring, the city had had multiple years where the health insurance increases had been double digits and more, and required significant changes in benefit levels to offset the changes in premium. So this has really provided an opportunity to stabilize the benefits. We've been able to work with the Labor Management Committee and add new network options that have proven to provide some cost savings for us, our ACO plans. We've set our last 3 years of premiums knowing that we needed to build the reserve with the goal of having 25% of projected claims in the reserve. So the difference, the orange and the gray bar, is the difference. The difference in those two is what we have been able to put into the reserves as our stabilization for the rates. And it's important to also note that the reserve contains both city and employee money from premium contributions, and that money can only be used to pay for medical plan related expenses. The purpose is to be able to stabilize our future increases and to have a cushion there for when we have unanticipated claims, which is very hard to predict. It could be, from cancer, premature births, all of that would be paid from our claims reserve. So the good news in all of this, even though healthcare costs really it's never good news, but the good news for us is that we're set to have our reserve, the target of 25% of claims, fully funded in the 2020 plan year, which is excellent. We had started out with the goal of saying in 3 to 5 years we wanted to have the reserve fully funded, and based on our plan's performance over the past 3 years, it looks like 2020 we will be fully funded. We've had great experience. Our plan is very well managed. We do have a lot of chronic conditions and some high claims in our group, but our employees and their family members are receiving good care, and they're taking care of it with our plan. So our reserve has built faster than we anticipated with below market trend increases here at the city. Then, moving on, just to look at our benefits program in general, we benchmark ourselves with 4 other local public employers, the City of St. Paul, Ramsey and Hennepin counties, and the state of Minnesota. We looked at all the components of our benefits package just to see where we stand with these groups, because we know a lot of employees here at the city have come from those jurisdictions. We also lose people to them, so we're competing in this market. I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I provided the information so you'll have it. We looked at benefits eligibility. We looked at our dental plan. We are, by the way, the only jurisdiction that does pay the full premium for both single and family coverage here at the city. The other jurisdictions have cost sharing on the premium. We looked at vision. The city does not offer a vision plan. One of the other jurisdictions does. It hasn't been really requested here. Life insurance, we're competitive. Short-term disability is an area of opportunity. The city did offer short-term disability coverage in the past, but it was all employee paid, so it was voluntary. The uptake was very low because it was expensive. So this currently is one benefit where we're the only one of these groups that does not offer this coverage. It's an area that we've been discussing over the past year. What has happened as a result of not having this coverage is employees that need to have time off due to illness or maternity leave or recovering from surgery have been using the sick leave donation program and have to ask for donations to get paid time off to be able to recover from surgery or get some paid time off for maternity leave in addition to the paid parental leave. So that's an area of opportunity that we have in the future. Long-term disability, all of us have employer-paid long-term disability benefits. Paid leave programs is another huge area of demand right now. If you can't open the newspaper without seeing articles about all these employers downtown that are offering 12 and 16 weeks of paid parental leave. The public sector is slow to get on board with some of that, but all of us here in this group that we looked at are offering between 3 and 6 weeks currently. We do get a lot of requests from our employee resource groups and other partners in the city that are interested in having us look at that paid parental leave and consider offering more. Paid caregiver leave has also come up quite a bit. That's another popular benefit in the private sector. We don't know of public sector that's offering it, but it's something that we've been discussing here, and that Laura Davis continues to talk with labor as well as part of negotiations. Leave donation program, I mentioned that we have employees that must use the leave donation program in order to get paid time off because of having a baby or recovering from surgery. And then paid time off benefits, we're all similar on that. Some are offering floating holidays, which is an area that we've also gotten requests regarding. Pre-tax programs, voluntary benefits, and finally, just to wrap up, we appreciate your interest in the benefits package, and this is where we need your direction and support. We need to determine where we want to be as an employer, and we want to look at all these options and come up with the program that best meets the changing demographics that we have in our workforce today. And we want to be able to ensure that we have an inclusive approach to health and benefits, and that we're aligning with all the city's core values and financial and business objectives. We know that employees today want to be rewarded with more than just a paycheck and basic benefits, so our approach needs to consider, as Patience mentioned, flexible schedules, paid leave programs, workplace culture, and wellness opportunities to make sure that the employee experience at the city is the best it can be. And that's our goal. We want to work with all of you on these things, along with the Labor Management Committee and our employee resource groups. And we appreciate your leadership and direction on some of these decisions that we'll have to make about our compensation and benefits in the future. Thank you for your time, and if there are questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rika, for all the good work you do. Every time we've had to be in touch with you, you've been fantastic. And so we really appreciate it. I have an employee transitioning out and a new one transitioning in, and you guys have done a great job with it. So I just want to thank you for that. One of the things that you mentioned in your report is the importance to people in the workforce dealing with flexibility. So this has been an issue for me for 21 years, so this isn't really about me anymore. But I'm wondering why we don't offer each employee a set amount of money and let them pick the benefits that they want. So for example, and I'm not complaining about this, but I want to point out, I am not married. The city pays for my health insurance. It pays $500 a month. Abdi is married. He gets family health insurance. He gets $2,000 a month. That seems to be an inequality almost between people who use the city for insurance purposes and those that don't. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have that benefit. I think that's awesome that we do that, but it does create winners and losers within the benefit system. So why wouldn't we have more of like a cafeteria plan of benefits, so someone like me might get a different benefit if I didn't claim family health insurance, which I have claimed over time, so I'm trying not to make this about me. I was married. We did use the city's system, although my husband didn't use the city's insurance. I think he did for a period of time, actually. I'm just trying to point out there seems to be some level of inequality in that, and is there a way to fix that, or does that just require a whole new system, and that's never going to happen, so go back to 21 years of complaining.
Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Goodman think that's a very good question. I can't speak to the history before I was here. I do know there are models out there that take that kind of approach. I think the city, in negotiating benefits as part of the collective bargaining process has had a more traditional benefits package. I think that's, something that can definitely be explored in the future. And I don't know if Jim, you have any history on discussions of that nature that you could, or if you're interested. But yeah, I think that's a legitimate question.
We'll have Mr. Jim Michaels. We'll allow time for Mr. Michaels to comment.
I will be brief just in response to the question. So, Chair Palmer, Councilmember Goodman, it has been a while since the BLMC has looked at this issue. But the last time we did, what our data showed us, and similar to your experience, was that about 80% of what we categorized as long-term employees, which is people that had been or will be with us for 10 years or more, 80% of those folks used family insurance at some point during their career with us. And therefore, the models that we looked at in terms of cafeteria plans or having something else, all of them had the effect of essentially requiring somebody who wanted or needed family coverage to spend a majority of their benefit dollars in order to obtain that, and that left them without disability coverage, dental, other types of things. So we have made the conscious decision that because such an overwhelming majority of our population will use that family benefit at some point, that there is kind of an equity there. Maybe not at any specific point in time.
That's a very bad answer, actually. And if you're one of the 20%, which amounts to hundreds of people, you're being paid less than everybody else. I'm not saying take away a benefit from the people who are getting family insurance. I'm saying offer the people who are not. I bet there's people even on this panel right now who don't use family insurance because their spouse or partner has better insurance. But those people are throughout the enterprise, are being paid less. And as the workforce changes and people decide not to get married or might not have kids, you're punishing people and saying your work is not valued at the same as somebody else's work. Because pay for women in particular, given that we're not paid equally with men generally speaking, is all about compensation. And so you're telling people who aren't married, your choice means you're not as valuable to us. And so I don't think we should take away the benefit for families. I think it's great. It makes the city family friendly. I love that. But then the people that don't choose it should get to choose something different.
Madam Chair, Council Member, I don't disagree. And I don't think that labor would necessarily disagree. Right. The question is, at what cost and what are the resources available? All I was speaking to is that the models of other employers that we looked at, and it's not limited to the ones that Rika had in her presentation. In practicality, dollars aren't unlimited, and unfortunately that isn't what happens. What I was talking about is that in cafeteria plan systems, it's usually the people that wind up needing family coverage wind up with less of a benefit package. I understand the issue that you've raised, and that remains an ongoing challenge for us to try to figure that out. But that's almost kind of endemic of the whole issue with health insurance as an employer-based item, which is certainly up for debate nationally, at least among some folks. Because the same argument could be made about people who maybe they have coverage, but they don't utilize it. So why should they be paying the same thing as somebody who is, or needs to go to the doctor once a week or whatever? So I think it's
the same thing.
I don't think it's exactly the same thing either, but it does raise those types of questions in terms of an overall benefit package. What is equity? And they're very good points that we will continue to wrestle with. I was asked to come up and explain the history, and so I tried to give that. I mean, I don't want to debate the rightness or wrongness of anything, because I agree with what you're saying. I was just trying to give the history of why we have what we have.
And we have great benefit consultants with Deloitte, and we can add that to the, we're continually modeling different plan designs and options, so that can be definitely something on our list to continue to look at. So thank you.
One of a separate presentation would be how our benefit plans compare to other benefit plans, but I can say, having had 10 years in the private sector in this industry, that the city of Minneapolis has one of the richest healthcare benefit plans I've ever seen. So I doubt that somebody is getting better coverage from their spouse's insurance. One of the ways that we look to normalize the payout, especially because this is a self-insurance plan, this is like we're using our city as a bank, is in having, there are individual deductibles for every member of a family. So while a single person's plan has one deductible, that deductible for family coverage needs to be met. There is both an individual amount to hit, or there is a family deductible to hit before a lot of that coverage starts coming forward. So I guess what I'm saying is one of the ways that we offset that, if you assume that people have healthcare needs, is because I need to hit a deductible for every member of my family before certain coverage kicks in. So there's a proportional, that is true, but it's not full coverage, and you need to hit those clips before coverage kicks in. I mean, it is full comprehensive health insurance, but it is not 100% covered at $1. Councilmember.
Madam Chair, I mean, this is a major issue in terms of money, though, because the amount of the family insurance is like 4 times the amount of the individual insurance. So it's a benefit that people are taking where they're getting paid more than everybody else. That's what the issue is. And so I'm just asking that we look at that, because essentially, you can use you and me as an example. I am paid less than you by a lot, not just a little, because the family insurance is a lot more expensive to the city. And I just feel like in a changing demographic where you're looking at all these new people, there's going to be lots of young people who aren't married who are coming into the city system. It's not a traditional system anymore. And it just feels to me like I'm being penalized for not being married across the board. Now I'm being penalized for not being married in benefits at the city. It's a major amount of money. If this was like $50, I probably wouldn't bring it up. And believe me, I'm not anxious to be bringing it up now either. It's on the agenda. I wouldn't have called Ricka to complain about it. But if we're talking about this, I just want to note it.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on, we kind of front-loaded the conversation noting a generational shift in who we're recruiting to the city and who we're trying to attract and who we need to be competitive with. And I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit in the last bullet point on sort of other potential benefits and what are we looking at that is attracting a younger demographic? What do we see people asking for? What do we see in private marketplaces emerge as sort of new benefits as those kind of generational shifts happen?
Chair Palmisano and Council Member Fletcher, it's really all over the board. I think that the generations that are now prevalent in the workforce want options. To your point, Councilmember Goodman, they want flex, they want to pick and choose. You know, there's all kinds of things out there around financial health, financial wellness. People want financial counseling. There's pet insurance that's come up and popped up for a lot of employers. The voluntary benefit space is huge. There's just a whole array of benefits that we could add as voluntary, and then employees could pick and choose, and there could be a contribution that the city makes, and then people could have options. So it's all those kinds of things. I think the leave programs right now is one of the biggest things in demand that we see, is they're that whole millennials and Gen Xers coming in want paid time off. They want flexible schedules. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but there's a whole variety of things that we can look at. And we want to make sure that we have that two-way communication going with our employees so that we're getting that input and we can plan ahead and keep you informed and you can help guide some of those decisions.
Other questions and comments? I don't see any. Thank you, Ms. Stennerson and Director Ferguson, for your time.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. And this is a receive and file item. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. Opposed? That carries. We have one last item on our agenda, and I will turn it over to Councilmember Cano to walk us through it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. You should all have a copy of the staff direction here in front of you. And this work began a few months ago when many of us were interested in supporting Heart of the Beast, the May Day Parade. There were questions about how the city is investing our resources, time, energy, staffing into supporting local theaters, the local art and creative economy. And so Councilmember Goodman and I have been chatting with this, and actually there's been a few other council members that have been expressing interest in this line of work as well. So basically what the staff direction is about is pulling together an internal city work group to review the body of work that we are doing currently on public art, on investments relating to the creative economy, to then apply strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis to the body of work, and then to bring back that analysis in the form of a set of recommendations that can help us improve our systems, our processes, that the council can then hear and receive at no later than November 6th at the Committee of the Whole, in addition to looking at ways that we can better align some of that work with our cultural districts work, our city's racial equity goals, and external opportunities for funding such as the National Endowment of the Arts program and the Bloomberg Public Art Challenge. So I can stand for questions.
Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Cano, I'll just ask if you can help us understand what came up, what drove your effort around this work group.
There's been, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's been a lot of different council members talking to each other about what this body of work entails, how is it supporting our current policy priorities, looking at ways to make improvements. And so because there's been more than 3 council members in the mayor's office and staff involved in those conversations, it just seemed like this would be a good idea to package those discussions to bring some coherent, organized support for some of that analysis and discussion so that we can better inform all of the council members on this topic. And then if there are specific actions that people want to take, there will be information, data, analysis, and intentionality behind some of those decisions.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the way Councilmember Cano has approached this. This came up as an extensive conversation in the Results Minneapolis meeting, and rather than waiting for the budget process to try to redesign a system, I think Councilmember Cano is intentionally trying to figure out kind of what the strengths and opportunities are within our arts operation and what the weaknesses are too, and how we can potentially move forward with some level of redesign. Councilmember Cano has been in touch with me multiple times about this, and I have had the opportunity to review kind of her work plan and what she had suggested come from the coordinator's office. So I put my name on this, which probably says I'm supportive of what she's doing, but I also highly respect the fact that rather than letting it turn into a budget fight, she's bringing it up in advance of the budget.
Super. Thank you. I'll call the question on this one. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. That action is taken. Thank you. With no further business on our agenda today, I'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you for coming.